Hey everybody, welcome to Nerdarchy, for nerds by nerds. I'm Nerdarchist Ted, and today I'm joined by...
Nerdarchy Dave.
And today we're going to review the most recent Unearthed Arcana, Into the Wilds.
Ow!
Jump down the description below where you can sign up for Nerdarchy, the newsletter, get weekly gaming tips, as well as learn how to game with us.
Alright, so we have another Unearthed Arcana. We've kind of moved away from races and classes, and we're going to get some tips for things to kind of add into our game from Mike Mearls. Now, I don't know if this is something that they're playtesting for a later product or not, but they're expanding upon the wilderness, kind of like the adventuring in the wilderness rules.
Well, it doesn't really feel like it's, both time-wise and material-wise, that it's going to be for Morning Canaans.
No, I believe that would be impossible.
So it's like, all right, well, we're diving into travel, and in the beginning part, it talks about the difference between like overland travel versus dungeon travel, and it's like, well, the same could apply if you want to take some of that dungeon travel thought into overland travel.
So part of it is kind of turning it into a little bit of a skill challenge as far as, everyone kind of like different people in the party are going to have different jobs, and one of them has to be the navigator. You guys are just going to get lost, and from there you kind of take it from there, and it's going to be some dice rolling to resolve some things. That part I was kind of like, man, that's a little bit boring. But actually, when he then like kind of broke it down and explained things, I was like, oh, this is actually really cool. I actually like the way this is laid out. And so, I mean, it's a lot of extra work, but I think it's extra work that will be kind of rewarding and add some real depth to your wilderness adventuring.
I agree. So like the you get into a navigation DC, and depending upon where you're trying to go, what you're trying to do, like that's gonna set it. And it's a simple chart of the destination has a clear road, trail, or well-marked path leading to it. There is no DC. There is no roll. You just do it. Then we jump to a 10. Destination lacks a path, but is in open terrain. So if you're going across, a meadow, a field, plains, it's pretty easy to stay on point. 15, destination lacks a path, but it's in dense terrain, such as a forest or mountains. A 20, we get into actual something is hidden. Destination is hidden with active efforts made to conceal its existence through mundane means. So something that normal people have the ability to do. All right, we're gonna close this off with vegetation or some manner of concealment. Now it's becoming tricky. 25. Now we're using magic to hide it, whether it's illusions or something else. Okay, this is not something that normal people are going to be able to find, and let's face it, a 25 is approaching that, it's impossible method. And 30 is destination is hidden using powerful magic, such as a regional effect that causes the forest trees to slowly shift and force the characters into the wrong path. And we've seen this kind of thing happen in movies and shows and novels, so like, it's not unheard of. So you could literally take that into your game, and we're talking about beyond mortal magic to make this kind of shift. It could be a powerful entity, a dragon or a god or some kind of divine being, or like the magic of the place itself doesn't want anyone to find it. So
what you're saying is powerful magic.
So like those are the different navigation DCs, and it becomes, a way for you to figure out how challenging that's going to be for the players to find it.
From there, we're going to rely heavily on random encounters and getting lost is kind of like there's a big part of this, and which is fun. I mean, if you don't make your navigation check, you get lost and you figure out how far you've gotten lost by, whether you've wandered around in circles and you're basically back where you started, or you've just missed the mark by a couple miles or a dozen miles or so. And then so it's going to add travel time to what you're doing.
I like how they actually take the time to say, like, if you roll, you roll 2d6 miles for one of the options in a random direction. So it's like, well, you could have gone past where you're going, but if somehow that is further than what you could possibly travel in a day, it's like retcon that to an area that they could actually go to.
Yeah, pick something that makes sense. One of the things that I thought was super cool about this is talks about figuring out what monsters are in the area. More specifically, monsters that have regional effects, because that is actually really cool. That's a really cool way for you to interject a monster in your game, in your campaign, that your players aren't ready for, and they don't necessarily have to encounter, but they can encounter the effects of that monster being around.
Yeah, regional effects are something that I really dig. I haven't used a lot with it in the games that I've run, but it is something that if you really want to make your world, rich and fantastic, you could be like, all right, well, there's a black dragon that lives in this area, and well, let's face it, the nice lush area that you grew up with has now started to turn into a swamp. You don't know why, it just is.
Yeah, so it just has a lot of flavor, and by figuring out those regional effects, you figuring out that monster, that may then inform some other baddies or hostiles that could be in the area that maybe you will use as random encounters. So instead of just randomly picking something or rolling something, you might be like, oh, you know what? This kind of creature's here, so this would make sense as a servant. So why not just use them? And then you can kind of theme it. And maybe it might build an element that you're going to use again in your campaign later on. We also get into checks and things that you can do as far as, athletics, history, nature, stealth, survival. So you're giving some options there, some ideas to work with. The next thing it talks about is using tactical terrain. So when those encounters happen, when random encounters happen, what kind of terrain can you kind of expect to be there that might make that combat a little bit more interesting?
And interesting and memorable at that. And then the last thing that it goes into is it gives you a region. So we have the Moon Hills. The Moon Hills are a rugged series of steep hills at the heart of the Nentir Vale. Patrols from Falcrest help keep the area's organized threats in check, but monsters often make forays out from the Cloakwood. Strange creatures drawn from the Feywild, the Shadowfell, and the elemental plane of Earth can also be found here. So it breaks down all the different things about this terrain, and I think that this is something you could literally be like, all right, well, we know this is something you could lift up, insert right into your game. We don't know exactly what the Cloakwood is, but you could make what the Cloakwood is for your realm, and its inhabitants sometimes go into the Moon Hills.
Well, the Nentir Vale is something in Forgotten Realms, so that's all Forgotten Realms stuff. But yes, you could file off the serial numbers and insert it right in your game. And actually, most of this Unearthed Arcana did not make sense to me. And I wasn't really latching onto it until I saw the example and see how it was laid out and how you might lay it out in your game. And I was like, oh, this is super useful. I think this is really cool. You put together, a half a dozen of these, and that could be your adventure for the evening or even beyond that. And it's definitely something you set aside and be like, all right, well, it's also kind of doubles as a little bit of world building. So, and the idea of the ambient mood. So that's just like the general gist of the area and location. He's got, there's like 7 bullet points, which, how it's affected, how the Shadowfell and the Feywild and the plane of elemental earth, how it all affects it, plus some other things is really cool. It talks a little bit about settlements, ruins and dungeons. So these are points of interest, really, is what we're talking about there. And then when we go into the next section, which is Moon Hills Exploration, again, it gives you the DCs for navigation. So you would, like, if you're going to use this method in your game for a particular area, you might have this done up already. Especially if you're playing like a very sandboxy type game or a hex crawl style game, this would work really, really well for that. It talks about the planar confluences, which is if you sleep outdoors near one of these things, well, what happens to you? On a 17 or better on a D20 of the night's sleep, there's interesting things that happen to your character because of that.
Yeah, I thought that was really cool, and that's something considering some of the craziness that happens in our games or in our world. Like, part of me wants to look at, like, should we create something with a chaos storm? Like, that's something that moves, so it'd be very, very cool to have this kind of thing done for that.
Yeah, what happens if you hang out here too long, sleep here, or whatever, take a long rest, a short rest, it could have different effects, which is really cool. You can extrapolate different things from these examples, and that's why I really dug them. It goes in and talk about the terrain because the terrain in this place is hilly and crags and stuff like that. It talks about the moon hills are an ideal spot for ambush as steep slopes favor a well planned attack. Then it goes into what kind of encounters you might have in this terrain.
So all in all, I think it's a very inspiring, very DM only kind of tool that you can use to help flesh out your preparation. So if you do a lot of overland travel in your games, or if you stick to an area and you'd like to flesh that out a bit more, I think this is a really handy thing to help guide you in making that so much better.
Yeah, I kind of see it as part DM prep and part world build. I think it's useful for both of those. So, like I said, the examples really tied it together for me. Like you're just reading, I was like, oh yeah, I guess, and then like it didn't make as much sense. But then when he laid it out and it was almost laid out in an encounter format minus the monsters, I really dug that.
Yeah, I thought that was great, and I'm putting together things. I'm like, how would I use this? What areas of our world would I like to see laid out like this?
So the question is, are you guys using something like this in your game, or are you going to adopt it to your game? We got a place where you can tell us all about it. That's down in the comments below. While you're at it, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.
You can check out the store over at nerdarchy.com.
So until next time,
Stay nerdy.